comedies preach. So, a bit like the adverts in the middle of I'm a Celeb in the middle there. So, okay, so if we have the first reading up, that would be absolutely great. So we're in Exodus chapter 18, and I'm going to start by reading verses 1 to 12. Exodus 18, 1 to 12. I'm doing it, so I better do this. Now, Jethro, the priest of Midian and father-in-law of Moses, heard of everything God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Do it from here. After Moses had sent away his wife Zipporah, his father-in-law Jethro received her and her 2 sons. One son was named Gershom, for Moses said, I have become a foreigner in a foreign land. And the other was named Eliza, for he said, my father's God was my helper. He saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, together with Moses' sons and wife, came to him in the wilderness, where he was camped near the mountain of God. Jethro had sent word to him, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him. They greeted each other and then went into the tent. Moses told his father-in-law about everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and about all the hardships they had met along the way and how the Lord had saved them. Jethro was delighted to hear about all the good things the Lord has done for Israel in rescuing them from the hand of the Egyptians. He said, praise be to the Lord who rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and of Pharaoh, and who rescued the people from the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods, for he did this to those who had treated Israel arrogantly. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and other sacrifices to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law in the presence of God. Sam.
Morning, everyone. We're all okay? Had a good weekend. We are looking at caring for your soul by living within your limits. And there is nothing like prepping a sermon with a 2-month-old baby at home while working full-time that shows that I'm probably not very good at this as a topic. But hopefully we're going to see quite a lot about what the Bible has to say about living within our limits this morning. For me, as you've probably heard already, I love to fill my time all the time, and I love to fill up as much of my life doing as much as possible, doing everything I can to be busy. And I'm guessing that many of you are like me as well in that. Our society and culture are telling us more is better. We want you to do more. The lyrics from the hit song, does anyone remember this song? I was 1, I think, when it came out. It's from a band called 2 Unlimited, and they said, no, 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 there's no limits. We need to do more stuff. I want you to fill your lives and impress. Be as busy as possible all the time. Spend all your money. Use up everything you have and use up your time. And that's a serious problem, isn't it? And it impacts all of us. A recent survey said that 79% of UK employees suffered burnout, with around 35% reporting extreme or high levels of burnout in their place of work. We are living unhealthy lives, all of us. And in church we do the same. Many churches have lots of people in them, but really, in reality, they're run by small amounts of volunteers or staff workers. And as each year passes, as society grows and our culture takes more and more control, we are getting closer and closer to burnout. We are getting worse at living within our limits. Today we're going to see a bit of advice that Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, gives to Moses as he leads God's people through the wilderness. But there is more to this passage than just like simple management strategy leadership advice. I believe actually in today's passage we see that we have an opportunity as Christians to live our lives in a society that seems completely doomed to be getting busier and busier. Jethro tells Moses that he has a very important job. He tells him that he is going to be the people's representative to God. And keep that in fresh right at the front of your memory, as I hope that throughout this passage today we're going to see glimpses of the true ultimate people's representative to God in Jesus. And Jethro is an interesting character, right? He may be new to you as he was to me as well. He was a priest in Midian, and it's quite clear from the first half that Andy's read to us that something relatively transformational has happened. We read in this passage that Moses tells Jethro everything that God has done for the Israelite people, and Jethro says, that's fantastic. There is obviously no God above your God. Jethro hears and understands the truth about the Lord and devotes his life to him. He gives a burnt offering to the Lord. This is exciting and a really helpful framework on the character and the personality of who Jethro is and where his heart is when he's giving Moses this bit of advice. And we're going to see two bits of advice, hopefully, this morning that Jethro gives to Moses. The first one is to get your priorities right. And it's an interesting piece of advice to give because it was already given in the first half of the chapter, but many of you may not have noticed it being given. This hidden instruction is the whole reason why Jethro is visiting in the first place. He is bringing Moses' wife and his children back to Moses. Usually in the Bible, if we see a little bit of repetition, it usually means that the person writing it wants us to remember that fact. Let's have a look at the whole passage on one slide. Don't worry, you don't have to read it. Because anyone notice something that is repeated an awful lot? Father-in-law. It's amazing, isn't it? Look how many times. I haven't counted. I should have done. Really, that would have been quite interesting, I guess. But when we see the repetition, it's really important that we know Jethro is Moses' father-in-law. Jethro cares for Moses. He knows him well. He loves him. Moses has spent many years working on Jethro's land, and Jethro is used to giving Moses instructions. It isn't a distant relative or a management consultant externally coming in to tell him what's what. Now, Jethro knows exactly who Moses is, what he's like, what his character is. This is a caring person who has the best interest of Moses at the center of his heart. And since Jethro's turning to the Lord in this chapter as well, he also has the people, God's people, close to his heart as well. From reading in verse 2, if you've got your Bibles open, we can see that Zipporah, Moses' wife and his children, were sent away. We're not really sure for how long or when exactly they were sent to go and stay with Granddad for a bit. But as soon as the Israelites settled down on their travels, Jethro says, okay, now is time for me to bring back Zipporah and the kids back to you, Moses. Have a look at verse 6. Jethro had sent word to him, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons. Now he easily could have said here, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with my daughter and my grandkids. But the subtle difference here tells us a lot about the priority and the responsibility that Moses now has. I'm here with your wife. I am here with your children, Zipporah's children. Moses is clearly instructed here to get your priority right. Jethro undoubtedly loves his daughter. He loves his grandkids, but the responsibility for their care ultimately lies with Moses. Get your priorities right, Moses. Before anyone and anything else, you need to make sure that you are a caring and loving husband and a good dad. Priority number 1. Once that's all in place, other stuff can fall in place around it. I think in the busyness of life, we can really lose sight of this obvious priority, especially those around us who we can take for granted. If you're married, your spouse is your priority, and spending time with them and caring for them should be central to the way that you live your life. If you're a Christian, your love for Jesus should be centered around your love for your family, and it should be reflected that way. There may be some of you that feel like passing ships in the night as you go from one club to another. Maybe the daily rhythm that you've just fallen into as culture has taken over may have accidentally just squeezed out one-on-one time with those that you love the most. And this doesn't just apply for married folk here. We are called, all of us, to get our priorities right so that we can live within our limits. This means sacrificing that work event so you can have more time with your kids. Saying no to that social thing so you can finally get that date night you've been talking about for months. Maybe finding time in that busy work schedule to take a drop out and call that elderly parent. Moses is called to lead a nation, to be the people's representative to God. But Jethro reminds him of his priority, to love his wife and care for his children. We see that reflected in the life of Jesus as well, don't we? When we read the gospel, it is so clear that Jesus prioritized. He focused on spending time with his Father in prayer. He separated himself so that he could prioritize. He took time out to be with his friends. The patterns of life were not always set up to be in front of crowds of people preaching like we always think they might be. No, he took time out, and responsibility came first. He ensured he had time for those that he loved, and he cared for them. This is Jesus who, as he hung on the cross, turned to his friend John and said, "Look after my mother." Get your priorities right. We see that ultimate example of Jesus. Get your priorities right. We're now going to turn to our Bibles again, and Andy, if you're good to read now from verse 13, part of caring for your soul and living within your limits is bite-sized sermons, hopefully. So if you take up the mantle, that would be great. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, so then from verse 13. The next day, Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning till evening. When his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What is this you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge, while all these people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses answered him, "Because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and instructions." Moses' father-in-law replied, What you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice. And may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them his decrees and instructions, and show them the way they are to live and how they are to behave. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Let them serve as judges for the people at all times, but let them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide themselves. That will make your load lighter, because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied. Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. He chose capable men from all Israel and made them leaders of the people, officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They served as judges for the people at all times. The difficult cases they brought to Moses, but the simple ones they decided themselves. Then Moses sent his father-in-law on his way, and Jethro returned to his own country.
Great. Thanks, Andy. Great. I want you to imagine with me for a moment. You don't have to close your eyes, don't worry. You're visiting a church on a normal Sunday morning, just like today. It's maybe no bigger or smaller than we are today. And as you enter the building, you are welcomed by a slightly frazzled man named Brian. He's the pastor. He says he's pleased to meet you. He asks you a few questions, the normal stuff, and he welcomes you to church. As you walk into the foyer, you start to take your coat off. You notice that Brian has pushed past you, and he's suddenly behind the hatch. He's asking you if you want a cup of coffee, maybe a cup of tea. He's letting you know that the milk is in the little jug next to the sugar. He's a pro. He's done this loads of times before. You thank Brian very nicely for the drink. You take your seat and you wait for the service to begin. But you just hear this tapping behind you as you're waiting for the service to start. Brian's on the sound desk. He's making a few alterations, last-minute changes to the words of the songs and to the Bible reading. He walks to the front of church, welcomes everybody in, and says, "We're going to have a time of sung worship." All of a sudden, Brian sprints to the right, picks up a guitar, and leads the first two songs very well. He puts his guitar down, takes a deep breath, and he carries on leading the service. He's leading prayers. He's delivering notices. He's walking around the church handing out the offering bag. He comes back to the front with a noticeable bead of sweat now working its way down his forehead. And Brian says, "We're now going to pray for today's speaker. Dear Lord, we pray for me as I bring the next 25 minutes. It's an extreme example, isn't it? And it makes you think how on earth Brian has got himself into this mess in the first place. He's just completely worn out. That behavior is not good for Brian, and it's certainly not good for the church either. Why do you think that sort of thing can be allowed to happen? It may be that Brian loves the control, that he doesn't trust anyone to do anything, and he's pretty good at everything already. It might be that nobody else wants to help. Brian's been asking other people to join in, but nobody wants to. Maybe Brian doesn't want to come across as being weak or incapable. Maybe he wants to make sure that everybody knows that he is up to the task. There could be a lot of reasons of why this sort of behavior happens and why we as people like to overdo it. I think for me personally, a lot of pride comes into it. Maybe you feel like you're a bit of a people pleaser and you just struggle to say no sometimes. Jethro notices here that Moses is a bit of a Brian, for whatever reason. And in the second half of this chapter, he makes it really clear, actually, in verse 18. I'm going to put it up on the screen. That's a quick picture of Brian for you there. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. You can picture the scene. Moses walks into work. He's sat at his desk, but already the queues are forming of all these disputes of the people. And he just sits at that desk all day listening to people's disputes. They get tired. Moses gets tired. So Jethro gives Moses this crucial piece of advice that Andy's read. Secondly, Moses, you have to get some help. These two mini bits of instructions within getting help. You can read about them in verses 13 to 27 that we just had read. The first is that Moses needs to show and tell the people God's commands. There needs to be training and structures in place so that people can actually consistently help to serve. It says, teach them his decrees and instructions and show them the way that they are to live and how they are to behave. Moses' job is to be the representative of the people to God. But how will they know and behave, how to behave and how to interact with each other if they don't have an understanding of what God is like? But it's not just tell people God's commands. It's also show. Remember, Moses' primary job, the people's representative to God, to do that means that Moses, you're going to have to show the people what living out God's commands looks like. If you're a leader here this morning, others, and that means elders, trustees, grow group leaders, if you lead a ministry, the instruction for you this morning is to take this advice on. Don't just tell people God's commands, but live it out in your day-to-day life. Show them the framework, but show them that glorified way of life. Telling people is one thing, but if you don't show people in your day-to-day life, how will they ever learn? That's a challenge, right? And equally, for those of us who aren't leaders this morning, we have to be receptive to God's words and to trust our leaders. We have to allow for those who lead to teach us so that we can trust and show and be shown Christ in the way that they go about their lives, so that we can go on and do the same. That's this community that is obviously being mentioned here in Exodus 18. There is responsibility on all of us to show and tell. It isn't just on Dave at the front. For the elders, our trustees, grow group leaders, we are all called to show and tell. And if we do this, it's better for our leaders, and it's better for us as well. Let's read again from verse 21. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times. But have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide themselves. That will make your load lighter because they will share it with you. Jethro tells Moses that he needs to start delegating the workload around. And if Moses really wanted to pick the best of the best, who do you think he'd pick? I guess he'd want somebody with a little bit of management experience. Maybe somebody who's got good time management, good people management, people skills. He's got a couple of qualifications on the CV. He's active on LinkedIn, maybe. No. Jethro totally understands the real requirements of what Moses needs to properly represent the people to God. Men who fear God. Trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain. These people do not need to be management material. They don't need to be high flyers. They don't need to be particularly old or particularly young. We're not looking for people with a theology background or even the most charismatic. The best people to help Moses as the people's representative to God are those who hate dishonest gain and are trustworthy and who ultimately fear the Lord. In the book of Proverbs, it says, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of God brings humility. That's the sort of people you want to lead with. The sort of people that we want in our church. If you're a leader this morning, find these people. Find these people to help you, to delegate to. They may not be the obvious picks, but we're looking for people to be more Christ-like. And if you can't find these people, go back a step. Show and tell. That's the instruction. And when we read the Gospels, again, we see Jesus showing this a lot in his life. He shows and tells people all the time, but he also delegates. It says in Matthew 10, these 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Do not go amongst the Gentiles or any other town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. As you go, proclaim this message. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal those who are ill, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Jesus shared and delegated to those that he trusted. He gives them restrictions and a framework, but he gives them responsibility. What an example to follow. That whole blueprint for Christian leadership is found in Jesus, that ultimate representative to God. And for those of us that are not leaders this morning, like me, the most loving thing we can do to love and care and serve our leaders is to make sure that they are able to share the load. Many of you, like me, may have grown up in churches where there is one bloke who seems to do everything, almost like a mini Brian. It's not good for him, and it's not good for the rest of us either. I think the passage here is saying that we need to share the load for the benefit of the leader and the benefit of us too. Leaders, you are called to show and tell and to delegate so that we can all grow and love one another and that we can get closer to Christ. That is a massive challenge to us as a church, because the responsibility is also on us, all of us. How can we take the strain from our leaders? How can we take the strain from one another when life gets too much? So much about caring for our soul by living within our limits comes from community, delegation, getting your priorities right and sharing the load with one another. We are all responsible. That's the challenge this morning. It's so clear that Jethro is saying, Moses, you need to get better so that you can do this a lot more efficiently. Jethro doesn't say that. He says, get some help. Ask for help so that it is better for you, but also better for the people. We've seen two instructions this morning, to prioritize and to get some help in. So how can we be more Christ-like in living within our limits? Well, ultimately, living within our limits requires a lot of humility. It is the understanding that we have a limit and we're not superhuman. It's understanding that there are seasons in life that just completely engulf us. So how can you prioritize better in your life? What things need to be dropped so that you can look after those that are close to you? Is there any framework that you can share your life with others so that they can help and take the strain from you? I found Grow Group a real blessing in this, an opportunity to share your lives with other people so that we can take each other's strain. And as I've been through a season where we have been in great need, it's been really lovely having other people care for us. And the idea is when other people go through the same thing, that we can care for them too. I struggle to ask for help, if I'm going to be honest with you. Even when I'm completely in over my head, I really struggle to send that text message, to pick up the phone, or just to tell people I'm way in over my head. I think I'd rather struggle along and keep people thinking that I'm impressive or capable, rather than the reality. That's pride. That's completely sinful and broken behavior. For some of you, we may need to understand that we cannot be in control of everything all of the time, that we need to get in some help to delegate some stuff. Maybe you need to pray to think about why that is, to take the focus off and power off us and give it to Christ in prayer. See, our souls, if we're going to look after them properly and care for them, requires community. So let's focus on that ultimate example of Jesus. I'm going to invite the band up. Jesus includes others. Jesus gets his priorities in place. Jesus led a completely countercultural way of life. When society and culture says, do more, find more, We just want to fill our time being busy as possible. Jesus says, no. Prioritize and get some help. I'm going to pray and then we're going to sing before communion. Yeah, Father God, we just thank you so much for the example that we see in this story of Jethro and Moses. Lord, help us to get our priorities right and help us to get some help in. Help us to follow the example of the ultimate people's representative to God in Jesus. I just pray that we can be more like him. And Lord, I just pray that you will really just help us as we come into this time of communion, that we'll examine our hearts, that we'll take those things that nag at us, those sinful desires, and that we'll have that opportunity now to bring them to the cross. Amen.